19-year-old Colleen Slemmer lies motionless on the cold ground. Blood pools around her lifeless body, and her injuries are so savage, so grotesque, that the man who stumbles upon her can't tell if he's looking at a person or an animal. As he steps closer, the horrifying truth emerges. Etched deep into her exposed upper body is a pentagram. Dirt and blood cover every inch of her lifeless body. He freezes. The weight of the discovery slams into him. He is looking at a girl, a brutally murdered girl. Heart pounding, he shakily dials the police, desperate for help. It was a scene of unspeakable horror, a crime that would send shockwaves across the nation. On today's episode of The Infographic Show, we unravel the gruesome details of this case and the person behind such a crime. Christa Pike, the youngest woman on death row. Christa Gale Pike was born in West Virginia on March 10, 1976. Today, she is on death row in Tennessee, held under maximum custody at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center. Despite its innocent-sounding name, the center is actually a women's prison under the Tennessee Department of Corrections. But Christa Pike's story doesn't end with just one crime. She is not only in prison for Colleen Slemmer's brutal murder, her record includes multiple felonies that paint a picture of a deeply troubled life. So, what drove her to commit such a shocking act? And why was Colleen Slemmer the target of such unimaginable violence? To understand this chilling case, we need to go back to the very beginning. Christa Pike's life started in chaos. Born into a very dysfunctional family with plenty of substance abuse issues to boot, her mother, Carissa Hansen, showed little interest in raising her, leaving young Christa to fend for herself emotionally. Meanwhile, her father, Glenn Pike, took things a step further, completely rejecting her. Shortly after Christa's birth, Glenn walked away, starting a new life with a new wife and family. When Christa tried to visit her father, she was often turned away, barred from seeing the family he had chosen over her. Carissa, on the other hand, worked a lot and then preferred to spend her free time partying with friends rather than caring for a toddler. Christa's aunt, Carrie Ross, gave a lot of details about her niece's early childhood. Ross said that when she visited the house, she would often find Christa crawling through piles of dog stool and other garbage. One time, Ross was out with Christa's mom when Carissa received a call that the 14-month-old Christa was experiencing seizures, something that would eventually land her in the hospital. Carissa hung up the phone and kept on drinking at the bar instead of going home to her child. So all in all, Christa Pike had far from the best home life. There was one bright spot though. At some point, Carissa, who at least had realized she wasn't much of a mom, sent Christa to live with her paternal grandmother. Christa seemed relatively happy in this house for most of her childhood years, as her grandmother treated her well, and the two had a very close bond. She believed her grandmother was the only person that had ever really loved her. So when her grandmother passed away in 1988, 12-year-old Christa was left devastated. Days later, she tried to take her own life. It's no surprise that those closest to Christa recall her spiraling out of control around age 12, and her family, of course, didn't help. There were rumors that her grandmother's boyfriend and a few of her mother's several boyfriends had treated her inappropriately and perhaps even abused her physically and sexually. Her family argued against those claims, saying that Christa was a pathological liar and had made up claims of abuse. But considering her family was either high, unreliable, or had little to no contact with Christa, their word doesn't mean much. Plus, one of her mother's boyfriends was arrested for whipping a preteen Christa, so Christa might have had a point. This may be why at age 12 she threatened one of her mother's boyfriends with a butcher knife. Perhaps uncoincidentally, that was the same boyfriend who had whipped her. During Christa's eventual trial, her mother Carissa owned up to a lot of the blame for Christa's troubled childhood. She admitted to drinking heavily and abusing drugs, letting Christa down repeatedly during her early years, and eventually causing her bad behavior. And as she grew up, Christa's behavior went from bad to worse. She threatened to run away from home if Carissa didn't let Christa's boyfriend move in with her. So he did. Christa's rebellion didn't stop there. She eventually began stealing from her own mother, straining their already fractured relationship. Yet despite her troubled behavior and chaotic upbringing, Christa demonstrated remarkable intelligence. Dr. Eric Engum, a psychologist who would later examine her, noted she had an IQ of 111, well above average. As far as her father Glenn was concerned, he would occasionally let Christa back into his life during this time, but when one of her half-sisters said that Christa had molested her, Glenn sent her to boarding school. Eventually, in an attempt to get her life back on track, Christa joined the Job Corps, a job training program for low-income youth to help them enter the workforce and start earning money. This is where she would meet her eventual victim, Colleen Slemmer. Even though they found themselves at the same place, Colleen and Christa could not have been more different. Born in Pennsylvania, On September 20th, 1975, Colleen was raised in a loving household by her mother and stepfather, along with her younger sister. After she finished high school, Colleen wanted to go to college, but it was too expensive. Since she was interested in computers and the Job Corps had a program specialized in computers, she decided she would try her luck there instead. What began as a simple clash of personalities soon escalated into outright hostility. Christa was convinced Colleen had her sights set on her boyfriend, Tadaryl D. Shipp, a suspicion that quickly festered into deep resentment. Christa and Tadaryl had met in the Job Corps program and bonded over their shared fascination with Satanism, a dark interest that seemed to fuel their connection. To Christa, Tadaryl was everything, and the thought of losing him, especially to Colleen, drove her paranoia to dangerous extremes. All of Colleen's friends insisted that was not the case, and Colleen herself was confused as to why Christa thought this, since she hadn't done or tried anything to do with Tadaryl. But nothing would convince Christa otherwise, and this went beyond simple jealousy. Colleen called her mother once and told her that she was terrified of a girl at Job Corps because that girl was out to get her. Colleen said she woke up one night to this girl, who she never named, standing over her with a knife and accusing her of trying to steal her boyfriend. However, Colleen needed to continue her program, and if she did report Christa's behavior, nothing was ever done about it. Then on January 12, 1995, Colleen's future with her Job Corps classmates suddenly seemed brighter. Christa reached out to Colleen and asked if she wanted to hang out, maybe go to Blockbuster and pick up a movie. Colleen, happy that her self-appointed enemy was finally getting along with her, quickly accepted. The teens signed out of their dormitory and went on a walk, along with Tadaryl and another girl, Shadala R. Peterson, when Christa offered to smoke some weed with Colleen to make up with her. So, they made their way toward Tyson Park, off the University of Tennessee's agricultural campus. When they got to a relatively quiet, isolated place in the woods, the mood changed. Christa quickly turned on Colleen, accusing her again of trying to steal her boyfriend, who was awkwardly standing right there. Colleen denied it again and again, but Christa wasn't listening. Then she started hitting Colleen, threw her to the ground, and started kicking her repeatedly. Colleen cried out, "Why are you doing this to me?" and threatened that she would report Christa to the Job Corps program. Christa responded by kicking her in the face. Colleen tried to get up and run away, but Tadaryl caught her and threw her back to the ground. Shadala was a short distance away from all this, as she had been told to stand aside as a lookout. Suddenly, Christa pulled out a number of weapons, including a box cutter and a miniature meat cleaver she had borrowed from someone. Christa slashed at Colleen, cutting her in the stomach, causing her to scream in pain. According to Christa's testimony later, she said she then stood over Colleen for a while just watching her bleed. When Colleen tried to run away again, Christa slashed her on the back. As the attack went on, Christa's co-conspirators started getting nervous. They thought, or at least they told the police they thought, that the whole plan was only to scare Colleen. Now they realized Christa was taking things much, much further. At some point, Colleen started begging for her life, telling Christa that if she just let her go, Colleen would leave the Job Corps and never look back. This got through, on some level, to Christa's humanity, as she told Colleen to shut up, since it's harder to hurt somebody when they're talking to you. Christa, consumed by rage, began slashing at Colleen's throat. As the brutal attack unfolded, Colleen begged for her life, until she tried to run away one last time. As Colleen got up to run, Christa realized that if her victim gets away and tells the Job Corps about the assault, Christa will be kicked out and will most likely go to jail. For Christa, this couldn't happen. So she grabbed a chunk of asphalt that was laying nearby and brought it down on Colleen's head. Before leaving the scene of the crime, either Christa or Tadaryl carved a pentagram in Colleen's chest and then dragged her body over to a patch of dirt. The next morning, a university employee stumbled on Colleen's dead body. Sickened by what he discovered, he immediately called the police. Police arrived on the scene and determined that the girl on the ground had been tortured for between 30 minutes to an hour before she was killed. As they looked around the area, they also had to keep expanding the crime scene. Signs of a fight, drag marks, and handprints in the mud, as well as broken branches, were everywhere. Then they took the body to the station and cleaned her up, then made a definite ID that it was Colleen Slemmer. And they had a feeling finding her killer wouldn't take long, because Christa Pike had made it really easy for them. For one thing, she showed up at the scene of the crime after the police had arrived. Officer Harold James Underwood Jr. testified that Christa came up to him with a few other girls and asked what had happened. After hearing about the murder, she asked who the victim was, and if the police suspected anyone yet. No one else in her group spoke. Officer Underwood said her behavior was really suspicious, since she was asking for details about the murder while giggling and looking amused. She also had a necklace with a pentagram on it, which was the same symbol carved into the victim. Officer Underwood told his superiors about Christa and her strange behavior, and they started asking around the Job Corps. Once again, Christa helped them build a really airtight case against her because she had spent the entire day after the murder bragging to people that she had tortured and killed Colleen. Her classmates weren't on board with any of this and immediately told the cops who were asking around that Christa had done it. Apparently, Christa had been talking about killing Colleen for a few days, but no one had taken it that seriously until it happened. Christa, Tadaro, and Shadala were taken in for questioning. Shadala turned on the others almost immediately, and once Christa was told that her other friend was talking, she confessed to the murder in horrible, excruciating detail. She also said her blood-stained jeans were still in her room, and she had given the miniature meat cleaver back to the person she had borrowed it from, leaving a trail of evidence all over the place. Unsurprisingly, Christa Pike was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and it wouldn't be the only felony charge in her life, but you'll find out about her other shocking crimes soon. Christa's trial started in early 1996. Her family actually testified on her behalf, essentially admitting they were such bad parents that they're partly to blame for her behavior. While almost no sane person disagrees with them, the judge and jury also didn't think it was enough to excuse torturing and murdering an innocent person. Next, Christa's defense attorneys alleged she had suffered from mental disorders like bipolar disorder, and that made her unable to understand the consequences of her actions. But Dr. Engum said that all of his tests showed that Christa was sane and had no brain damage that would excuse her violent behavior. He did point out that she had a very severe borderline personality disorder, which probably influenced her rage and jealousy, as well as some symptoms of drug abuse, especially of inhalants. Dr. Engum thought Christa had lost control during the attack, and it may not have been premeditated. But the fact that Christa lied to Colleen to lure her to the woods and then ignored her cries for help while torturing her for almost an hour were too much for the jury to overlook. To convict Christa of first-degree murder in Tennessee, there had to be aggravating circumstances. The prosecution argued that in this case there were two. First, the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that it involved torture or serious physical abuse beyond that necessary to produce death. And second, the murder was committed for the purpose of avoiding, interfering with, or preventing a lawful arrest or prosecution of the defendant or another. The evidence against Christa was overwhelming. The brutality of the crime alone satisfied the first condition for a first-degree murder charge. But it was Christa's own words that sealed her fate. She admitted that one of her motives for killing Colleen was to silence her, preventing her from reporting the assault and getting Christa expelled from the Job Corps program. This admission highlighted not just the calculated nature of her crime, but the lengths Christa was willing to go to protect herself, ensuring the first-degree murder charge would stick. On March 22, 1996, the jury was asked to start deliberations. They deliberated for just a few hours before concluding that Christa Pike was guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. On March 30th, the court decided on her sentence, death by electrocution. Her co-conspirators also received sentences. Tadaro got life with a possibility of parole, plus 25 years for the conspiracy charge, and Shadala got probation for pleading guilty to being an accessory after the fact, and had given the cops all the evidence they needed to convict Christa and Tadaro. But Christa Pike's verdict was shocking to some, even given how serious her crime was. The fact that Christa Pike was barely a legal adult when she killed Colleen, 18 years old at the time, made some anti-death penalty groups lobby to give her a life sentence instead. Her lawyers appealed the conviction based on 8 alleged mistakes made during the trial, but the state was unsympathetic. On October 5, 1998, they found no serious errors had been made during the trial, and death row was appropriate, considering the nature of the crime and the defendant. The state set her execution date for August 19, 2002. Christa's legal team decided to file an appeal in July of 2002 to delay her execution and hopefully get her conviction overturned. However, Christa hadn't made their job easy because in August 2001 she tried to kill a fellow inmate, Patricia Jones. Christa attacked Patricia with a shoelace, strangling her until she almost died. So not only did her lawyer's 2002 appeal not work, but Christa actually went on trial again for her murder attempt against Jones. In August 2004, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years. Christa's lawyers attempted to get a retrial in 2008, but were denied. In 2014, Christa's team made a last-ditch attempt to get her off death row. Christa's lawyers argued that her age and mental state played a significant role in the crime. At the time of the murder, she was incredibly young and they claimed mentally underdeveloped. They also pointed to a history of mental illness, which had been exacerbated by years of harrowing physical and sexual abuse throughout her childhood. These traumatic experiences, they argued, had shaped her psyche and contributed to the actions that led to her heinous crime. The defense sought to portray Christa not as a criminal but as a deeply damaged individual shaped by circumstances beyond her control. In 2019, the court read the appeal and denied it. For the last time, Christa Pike was officially out of chances to appeal her case, but she could still try other ways to escape her circumstances. One of her lawyers, Angela Bergman, filed a lawsuit against the state of Tennessee in 2022 to get Christa better living conditions. Due to Pike's unique circumstances, she was basically in solitary confinement, even though officially she wasn't. In Tennessee, death row inmates are separated from the general population, but they can still work jobs, spend time together, eat together, and go outside of their cells, subject to good behavior. But since Christa Pike was the only woman on death row in Tennessee, she didn't get to do any of that. Bergman argued that being kept in a cell the size of a parking space 22 to 24 hours a day had absolutely destroyed Christa's mental state. Christa actually won this lawsuit, and her lawyer celebrated the small victory, saying this not only means a reprieve from decades of harmful and unconstitutional conditions, but an opportunity to have a meaningful positive impact on those around her. Things got so bad during her solitary confinement that in the small windows of time when Christa could see people, she decided to plot her escape. At some point during her prison stay, Christa started writing letters back and forth with a personal trainer named Donald Kohut. The New Jersey man struck up a friendship with the prisoner that eventually got really close and intense. He started making the 900-mile journey to visit Christa in prison in Tennessee. Eventually, they decided they wanted to have a real relationship, which meant she'd have to get out of prison. In March 2012, New Jersey authorities arrested Kohut when they found evidence that he, along with a prison guard and Christa herself, were plotting her escape. 34-year-old Kohut was charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape, as was 22-year-old Justin Heflin, a guard at Christa's prison. The guard was also charged with facilitation to commit escape. Heflin's family said that Kohut had threatened his life, and that was the only reason he was helping with the escape plot. Authorities said Heflin had helped simply because he was getting bribed to do so. Whatever the case was, the escape attempt had been interrupted before it could even begin, and Christa, to the relief of many, would remain behind bars. At this time, Christa's future seems bleak. She has no possibility of parole, and the fact that she tried to murder another prisoner works against any good behavior claims on her part. Still, she is on death row, but many prisoners sit on death row for decades without even facing the electric chair. The state of Tennessee hasn't executed a woman for 2 centuries, so she may never actually get put to death. In fact, since the beginning of the modern era of the death penalty, which started in 1976, only 18 women have ever been executed in the entire United States. But on August 27, 2020, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery asked for a final execution date to be set for Christa Pike. Her lawyers kept asking for extensions, as usually happens in death row cases, and eventually asked for her death sentence to be overturned altogether. According to her legal team, executing Christa Pike goes above and beyond any punishment she should receive for her crime, as personnel would be required to execute a severely mentally ill, brain-damaged, and traumatized child who became the teenager who committed a terrible crime. They also pointed out that if she's put to death, she would be the first teenaged offender to be executed in modern times. Will the arguments work? Well, it's possible, as Tennessee has previously reversed a female inmate's death sentence. Gail Owens was supposed to be put to death on September 28, 2010, for paying a man to kill her abusive husband. But in that case, both local and national groups campaigned to overturn her death sentence, since the man she killed had been abusing her and putting her life in danger. In response, Governor Phil Bredesen overturned her sentence, and Owens was released on parole about a year later. However, Christa Pike doesn't have the same degree of support from people. Her victim wasn't an abusive husband, but an innocent classmate her age who had done nothing to her. So what's the most likely scenario? That Christa Pike will die behind bars. Did you know the story of the youngest woman on death row? Let us know in the comments below. In the meantime, check out what happens in the first 24 hours in Japanese prison, or click on this other video instead.